So welcome everybody to ArcGIS Tasks Introduction. With me I have Jason Camarano. My name is Amir, and we both work with two lovely ladies, Christine, Leslie, and Ariel, on tasks. Christine now is in the booth if you have questions, and Ariel is our developer. She is in the SDK island if you are interested in customizing tasks. But the way we approach tasks is we'll start with mimicking a live call with technical support. Mm-hmm. Jason will be the technical support. I will be playing the customer. And after this session, we'll have a test. So listen carefully. I know it always gets everybody's attention. So, hello.
Hello. My name is Jason Camarano. See, I told you it's not very representative. What seems to be the problem?
My name is Amir. I work in an organization. And I get really frustrated because everybody does things different in our organization.
Yeah, I get it. So you guys have no best practices. Everything's just thrown around on paper.
And I'm sorry to be ranting, but that's not the only problem. People are human beings. Human beings make mistakes.
Yeah, you don't have any quality assurance, right? So you guys are just reading everything upside down, basically.
Yes, kind of. And when people make mistakes, it costs a lot of money.
Yeah, you definitely want to catch the errors as they happen.
Yes. So, we've been also getting complaints from other departments that the updates we do take too long, but it's hard to know what too long is. Sometimes a job takes 5 minutes, sometimes it takes more.
Yeah, I know. There's only so many coffee breaks you can take in a day.
And we try to catch up by recruiting new employees, but training them takes so long until they become productive.
I just hope you don't realize this is my first day.
And don't people know how to read the manual? We took so much effort in writing these nice manuals for those new people.
Yeah, I know. We've got ones here that have at least 4-digit numbers in the final page count.
And I wish technology didn't change so fast. Our organization is special, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't heard that one before.
And technology changes so fast. I remember my first GIS course, ArcInfo.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means. Who here has used ArcInfo? Show of hands. All right. Well,
you're still the minority.
Still here too. Every time I go, I'm like, well, maybe it's not going to be many people, and this joke's not going to fly.
Okay.
All right. We still got a few more years of that one.
So, our workflow of the day is to create new building footprints, something that everybody can understand very easily. It's going to be editing focused, but you can apply what we're going to show to sharing, analysis, other domains. I'm going to describe you the workflow we're trying to achieve.
All right. Tell me what you got.
Okay. First thing you do is you locate your work area. You can use an address or you can use the subdivision name. You zoom it to that area. You select the subdivision you're going to work on, identify it, copy the subdivision name, and put it on a little piece of paper. Don't make any spelling mistakes, please. Then you create a new building or buildings in that subdivision. Make sure they don't overlap. Make sure they don't cross other things. Make sure each one has an address point later. And then you attribute the new buildings, and you have to put the subdivision name that you copied over onto each of those buildings. Then you save your edits.
All right. Simple enough.
Think so?
I think so.
Okay, so show me how you do that.
You got to push the 4. There we go. Is that me? All right, cool. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that workflow you gave me and I'm going to incorporate it into a task. And in this whole, we're taking it out of the oven already pre-made, I already pre-made a task with that workflow in place. So we have this task here called Create Buildings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double-click on that. And the first step was to locate your work area. So you enter an address or you enter a subdivision name. I'm just going to go ahead and type in here Oakleaf, because that's the name of a subdivision that I know of. And as you can see, it's the only one listed, so I'll double-click on that. So now I'm in my work area. I'll click Next Step. Now it says in the task, using the Select tool, select the subdivision that will contain the building footprints created during the task. So as you can see, I'm going to select the subdivision. Additionally, none of the other features in the map are being selected. That's because the task has the ability to turn off layer selectability on a step-by-step basis. So on this step, I've only made subdivisions the selectable layer. So I'm going to click Next Step. Now it's going to tell me to create my buildings. As you can see, building footprints is the only layer available for me in the create buildings that have been embedded within the task pane. Similar to the locate, you saw both of these panes have been embedded within the task pane window. The benefit about using tasks is that you can close everything. Dock your ribbon, close all your other panes or dock them, and just simply use the task pane itself. So now I'm creating my building footprints. In this step, I've also turned on the imagery layer so I can see how the buildings look. And because this is my first day on the job, I'm just going to create some buildings like so. And those are very quality buildings. They all have 4 sides. So now I'm going to click Next Step. And in the next step, I am going to need to attribute those buildings. So I flipped off the imagery layer because you don't need to see how awesome these buildings are. And I have the 3 building footprints that I created selected and populated within the attribute pane, which is also embedded again within tasks. It says in there, using the attribute table below, attribute the created building footprints. So I can go through and select each one and customize their attributes. Now, I remember you stating that I needed to write something down on a piece of paper and spell things correctly and whatnot. Well, what tasks did is in the second step where I selected the subdivision, is it copied the name of that subdivision into memory, and then it actually pasted it into the subdivision name field on each one of those building footprints that I created. So the task is able to do this ability of copying attributes and calculating fields at a later step. So I'm not going to edit any of the attributes here. I'm just going to go ahead and click Finish. And then it's going to prompt me right now to save my edits. But since this is a demo, I am going to say no. So, how about that?
Are you looking for a job, Jason? So, thank you, Jason. Pretty impressive. Any code used here?
Absolutely no code used, and we'll show in just a moment how this can be done. We can create it with using absolutely no code all through the UI in Task Designer.
Right. So what is a task? So you saw a set of steps. They have to be sequential. They guide you through a repeatable workflow. So that's the key word, sequential and repeatable. You can obviously see how a new employee can be effective and productive from the first day on the job. So you can use it as a guide. But we want to take it further than that, as you'll see later. We want to make it also interactive. If you could take everything Jason did and put it into a geoprocessing model, you don't really need a task. But in steps that requires user input, like selection and other types of inputs where it's interactive, you can use tasks. They also improve efficiency. Imagine how many mouse clicks would have been necessary to turn off and on layers, selectability, manipulate the selection, and so on. In this case, Jason did nothing of those. And if you have a good workflow, a repeatable workflow that produces the best product using the best practice, you also improve the overall quality of your data and your product, whatever that is. In the workflow, you can actually use any language in task, even Hebrew, right to left, Arabic, German, Spanish, doesn't matter. But more important, you can use the business language, right? We don't say select by rectangle. We say select a subdivision. It's obvious for the user what they need to do, and we give them the right tool in the right time, and they are fully configurable. When you design a task, of course, you need to know the business, obviously. They need to be repeatable, and you also need to understand the environment, right? So you need to know the maps, the layers, the tools. If you're using an add-in, you can also use a step in a task to call an add-in that somebody else developed. And you also need to know who's going to use the tasks, right? So maybe they don't have the license to run a certain command. So it's important to know what license level they're going to have, their roles, permissions, and so on, the environment basically they're going to use. So that's also important. If we look at the step, which is kind of the most important component of a task, then what you saw there were instructions. Jason's going to show us soon how he puts them in. There's a behavior that we'll touch on, and then there's the heart of the task are the actions. So a task can call any command in ArcGIS Pro. It can also run any geoprocessing tool, whether it's a tool, whether it comes with as a system tool, or your GP model, or your GP script tool. It can run all of those. You can even pre-populate some of those parameters on geoprocessing tools, so it's powerful. Selection action. You can clear selection, you can have the user select something and then save it to your selection, give it a name, and later you can restore that selection. You can copy attributes and calculate like we saw before, and you can also verify. The verification action prevents the user from proceeding to the next step if they haven't done something correctly. So you catch the error as they happen, and you can provide the error message, feedback for the user. Again, type it in. This is what the user will see, and when they comply with the verification action, the constraint, they will just proceed forward. From the map view environment, you can open a map, you can close a map, you can decide if you have multiple map views open, you can decide which one will be the active one. And you can also link and unlink views. So you have a 2D map, and certain step opens the 3D map, and they are linked, and because of that, it zooms to the same location. And for that active map view, you can control the layer visibility, which layers are selectable, which one are editable, which one are snappable. You can select a layer. That drives a lot of functionality in ArcGIS Pro because it's contextual, right? So you can decide which layer will be selected, and you can even turn on and off labels which might be effective for QA processes. And we also have the snapping manipulation there that might be applicable for utilities maybe, to know that when you create something, you're snapping to the right type of features. In terms of step behavior, you'll see buttons. Jason pressed next step. Sometimes if you put a geoprocessing tool, you'll have a run button. And sometimes you might hide them all together. It's fully automatic and you hide it from the user, like the save edits that we saw. So of course, the less clicks, the more efficient. But the default is manual, which is the less efficient one, which requires the user to run something, a command or a GP tool, and then also to say when they're done and move to the next step. On a step life cycle, this is what happens. When you enter the step, all the map and layer settings occur. So we know that you are looking at the environment as the author of the task intended you to see. Then we can do some action, selection, copy, and calculate. We can also do the same actions just before you run the tool, including verification, basically making sure that if the user changed something, because we don't prevent the user from changing selection and so on, the action will have the right inputs to be successful, right? So if the tool runs a selection, for example, and it needs selection to run on, we can make sure that selection is there when it's running, even if the user pressed on the clear selection button, for example, right? Then we have the action, and then in the end, we can have, again, some actions. Verification is important because it prevents you from proceeding if you don't comply with the logic that you configure. So automatic can be visible or hidden. If it's something that takes a long time, like a geoprocessing tool, you probably want to have it visible, but automatic, that's fine, just so the user doesn't think that something is running or stuck, and will understand what the system is doing. Auto run is something that you're waiting for the user to tell us, basically to tell the system when they are ready. Something like selection, right? You can select something and regret it and change it and select the right things. It might take a while, so only the user can tell you when they're done or create features. The auto proceed behavior is, you see the run button, and that's something like a geoprocessing tool. You press the run, and then it just runs and you proceed to the next steps. And then you have the manual, which is the less efficient behavior, maybe something like a GP tool that you run multiple times. Select, run, select, run, select, run. So, and that's a default because sometimes it's hard for us to know what is the behavior for every command. And then sometimes, like the locate, you might be in the right working area, so you might just want to skip it. So you can provide the ability to skip by checking that box. So Jason, back to you. I want to see, please, if possible, how you can configure a task without any coding.
All right, let's do this. Okay, so let's start off just by talking about how to create a task from scratch. You have ArcGIS Pro open and you want to just start creating a task. First thing you got to do is you got to create a task item. A project can have one or many task items, and then each task item can have one to many tasks. And then each task has its own set of steps. So to create a task item, you would go to Insert, Task, New Task Item. And that'll create the task item, and you'll actually see it located in the catalog pane. You'll see all your task items located here. So I already have a task item in this example, so I'm already just going to use that one. And to edit it, you simply click the menu button and say Edit in Designer. So now the Designer pane opens, and the Designer pane is basically a one-to-one representation of the properties of the item that you have selected in the task pane. So as I click on this folder here, you'll see the properties of that folder. As I click on this task here, you'll see the properties of this task. So what you see on the left is what you see the properties on the right. Additionally, when you're in designer mode, you'll see a set of tools on top of the task pane that are normally not visible when you're running the task itself. These are how you create the new folders. Like I can create a new folder right now, a new group, and call it demo. Give it a description. This is a demo. And that will appear at the bottom of the task pane down here, as you can see. So let's, in this folder, create this task. We're going to recreate this exact task of creating the buildings and attributing them and turning on and off the layers and copying attributes. We're going to just recreate that from scratch right now. So let's go back to the tools here and click New Task, and it creates it here in the folder that I had selected. Here are the properties of the task. I'm just going to call this UC Demo Create Buildings. I can give it a description as well, and that'll also appear at the bottom as well. So you can use your own business logic, your business terminology, and all this stuff so that you can make it, you can configure it to be how you want the work. You can configure it how you like. So let's go ahead and double click on that, and as you can see, there are no steps, so we need to start creating steps. So the first step, if you recall, was to locate the work area. So I'm going to click New Step, and now a step is here, and I see the properties of the step. I have the name, which I can change right now to Locate Work Area. I can even give it a tooltip, Locate Box to find your work area. And this tooltip will appear if a user ever hovers over that step. So you can customize, you can configure that as well. Instructions. Instructions are very important. These are where you will instruct your users what to do in each step. You can have as much text as you want here, so I can be very precise and very specific. So using the locate box below, find your work area. That appears just below the step in the task pane. Additionally, I can select text and I can bold it. I can select other text, I can underline it. I can even select text and put in a URL. Aside from a URL, I can also put in a directory on my local network. So I can have this point to a Word document somewhere out on my local network. So when a user clicks in this area, instead of opening up the website, it's going to open up a Word document. Or it can go to YouTube for a video or something like that. The run and proceed instructions, these appear at the bottom of the task pane. We do limit how many characters you can use in those run and proceed instructions, because here is just where you want to inform the user what to do when they're finishing up the step. So in this case, you can just say, click next step to continue. And that appears at the bottom. And as you can see, we don't want to have a huge amount of text there, because it's going to start cluttering the task pane and kind of overlapping over the stuff that might be embedded. Below here are the step behaviors, which Amir pointed out. We've got manual, auto run, auto proceed, automatic, and automatic steps can be hidden, and then optional. In this case, we're going to make this step optional because this was just locating our work area. You might already be in your work area, so you could just skip the step if you get to it. Now, the meat of the step, actions. This is the command or geoprocessing tool that will be run for this step. Now, I could go in here and go to command and search for the locate pane that way. But to make things simpler, we've added this one-time record command that allows me to go anywhere in the ribbon, the map tab, for example, or actually anywhere in the software for that matter, and I'm going to click locate. So once I click the command, it recorded that command and set it for that step. So it's done. I don't have to type in anything. I just got the locate pane set for this step. If I double click on this, you can see that the locate pane, it has the ability to be embedded within the task pane. Some commands like locate, create features, merge, and all geoprocessing tools and all Python scripts and all models, they can all be embedded within the task pane. And in some cases, like geoprocessing tools, scripts, and models, you can set preset parameters. On the locate pane, I also have some preset parameters that I can use. I only want subdivisions to be my locate provider. I don't want to search for XY. I don't want to search for geocoders. In this example, I'm just going to search through my subdivision layer. I could even put a predefined search string on the beginning so that that is preset in the locate pane when the user runs the step. Now that that's done, I can go over to my views tab. Here's how I control what views are open, what views are closed, and what views do I not care if they're open or closed. Here, I want to make sure the layers view is active and open. So it's already by default active and open. I have another view, an address data management view. I leave it as a dash, meaning that if it's open, leave it open. If it's closed, leave it closed. This is actually the most efficient way to do it, because if you say to manually close it, it's going to check to see if it's open and try to close it. So I'm just going to leave it as a dash. Here are the contents. This is how your layers will be addressed when the step begins. In this example, I had the subdivision layer selectable. I had certain layers turned on. In fact, my map that I have set up right now is set up exactly how I want the map to look when the user runs this task. So I'm just going to click this button here. It says current view, and it just sets it up to exactly how my current view is set. There's some things I can go in here and tweak, like I don't need this to be selected. This doesn't need to be selected here. This can, world imagery is turned off. I don't need these to be selectable. You can do other things, like you can select multiple layers and start cycling through multiple layers just to make things easy and configurable. Additionally, I can control the snapping parameters, like do I want point snapping on, do I want end snapping, vertex snapping, and so on. So that's pretty much it for my first step. Also, if you'll notice here, my step behavior is actually locked to auto run. The reason that is because since I'm embedding the locate pane, it's automatically going to run, meaning the pane is already going to be active and displayed within the task pane itself. So you want to have it auto run. There's no reason for it to be manual, there's no reason for it to be auto proceed, and there's no reason for it to be automatic. This is something that you want the user to see, interact with, and then when they're ready, click next step to continue. So next step was to use the select tool. So select a subdivision. I can give it a tooltip, I can give it some instructions, I can say using the select tool, select one subdivision. And then I can also say click next to continue. All right, so that's all set up, and in this case I wanted to get the select tool. So simply again I can click the record and get my tool. And this is a one-time click recorder, so it turns off after you've clicked the command. If you want to do your whole workflow from start to finish and have the recorder always on, go over here to the task pane itself and click this record commands button. Clicking this, you can see it's pulsating right now. That means that this recorder is on, and all the buttons that I'm clicking, all the tools that I'm running are going to be recorded, so you'll get a nice shell of your task when you're done, and then you can go in and start setting up the behaviors, typing in the instructions, doing all that stuff, but you'll have a general outline of what you want your task to do, and then you can click stop, and then you can also delete any erroneous steps that might have popped in there. Like let's say you click delete because you created something you didn't want, but that's actually not part of the task. You can go through and just modify it and configure it how you'd like. Now I can go back to views, everything's set up. Contents, it's actually set up how my previous step looked. So you can see these are all dashes. But what I wanted to make sure is I want to make sure that the subdivisions is the only selectable layer on this step, because this is when the user is going to be selecting subdivision. You don't want them to be selecting anything else. You want them to only be able to select a subdivision. So I set that one to be only selectable. Let me flip back to general here. This command that I have set is just calling the select by rectangle tool. I don't want the user to hit run to activate the select by rectangle tool. I'm going to make it auto run again. So the command's going to be activated. Wait for the user to click next step. Now, we have these set of actions here. As Amir pointed out, there are 3 times additional actions can happen within a step. When you start the step, meaning as soon as the step begins, certain actions can occur. Prior to command execution, so when you click the run button, if the run button is available, when you click it, a whole bunch of actions will happen and then the command will be run. And then finally, when you exit the step, so when you click next step or finish, these actions will be run. So in this step, I want to copy attributes from a feature or record currently selected, because the user is going to select something, they're going to hit next step. And it's going to be from the subdivision table, because that's the only thing they can select. And the attribute that I want to copy is from the field name, and I'm just going to copy it into a variable called my name. So to reiterate, I'm copying an attribute from a feature or record selected from the subdivisions table, and I'm copying the name field into a variable called my name. This variable I'm going to use in a later step to calculate a field onto the building footprints. So I'm going to click done. So you can just see here in kind of a rough outline that you have the select by rectangle tool, and then when exiting the step, a copy attribute action is going to occur. Next step was to create the building footprints. I'm going to skip adding the tooltip and instructions because time permitting. Go over to actions, use the record again, and hit edit, and then hit create. Notice that edit wasn't recorded because that's technically not a command. I'm just switching tabs. This recorder only records commands. So when you, let's say if you open up the tools, if you have the record on and you click tools, that's not an actual command. That's just opening the tools pane, and then you can actually click on a geoprocessing tool, and that's what it'll record. Okay, so create has been recorded. Let me double click on that. If you notice, even on the left, you see what the user is going to see. They're going to see all these features, but I don't want them to see everything. I want them to specifically create a building footprint. So I'm going to apply a filter on the create features and only show them the building footprint, so they get the right template at the right time. I'm going to click done. And in this step, go over to views. Everything seems fine there. And let's go to contents, subdivisions are selected. I'm going to make sure building footprints are selectable in this situation. Everything else looks good. Oh, I do want to turn on the base map, because that was one thing that we did on this step, is turned on the base map so you can see the buildings that you need to create. All right, auto run is once again automatically selected because the create features window has been embedded. So this is the only behavior that can happen when you have an embedded pane like this. If you had Buffer, for example, a geoprocessing tool, Buffer, or any of the other tools, Union, Near, those don't have a specific step behavior associated to it because you could run those multiple times, but you can still embed it. So you can embed Buffer into the task pane and set it to manual, so you can select multiple features, hit run, which buffers, select more features, hit run, which buffers, and then click next step to continue. All right. Another new step. In this one, we're going to attribute buildings. And I'm going to go ahead and record the attributes pane. And as you can see, when I'm clicking these buttons, they are popping open the window, so I'm just going to close them. And in this step, what I want to have happen is I want all the features that the users created throughout this task to be selected, so that when the attribute pane, which will be embedded, when the attribute pane appears inside the task pane, all the features that I created are going to be selected and visible within the attribute pane. So to do so, I'm going to add an additional action. So when starting the step, so this is before the attributes pane is even run, I'm going to create a selection action. I am going to select features or records created in the task. That's it. So now all these features will be selected. Additionally, I want to calculate the field subdivision name on all those building footprints that I created. So I'm going to say calculate field. My selection are going to be features or records created in the task. And the table that I'm going to be calculating this on are building footprint. And I'm going to be calculating the subdivision name. So just to reiterate this one more time, I'm going to be all the records that were created in this task in the table building footprints on the field subdivision name. I'm going to set that equal to this variable down here called my name. So those of you who are familiar with the calculate fields geoprocessing tool, this is what it looks like. The only difference is these variables that we created during the process of creating the task now show up in the bottom. In fact, I could even filter by just showing task variables. So now I set subdivision name equal to that, and then I scroll down and I click done. So as you can see, I've selected so I'm going to select features or records created in the task. I'm going to calculate the subdivision name in that, and then that's going to be all before the attributes pane will be automatically run. All right, so once again, look at views, look at contents, everything looks good. And then my final step was saving my edits, which I can go to, I can just call it save edits, go to actions, record saving edits. I'm not going to say yes to that. So that's recorded. And I want to make this automatic and hidden, so that when the user's finished attributing, they see the button finish on the bottom. Since the next step is automatic and hidden, they're going to click finish, the save edits thing is going to pop up, they just click yes, and then they're good to go. So that's it. I close the task designer. Now I have my task. I can run it from start to finish. It's going to look exactly, and it's going to function exactly like the task that I presented to you earlier. So there you have it, Amir.
Thank you, Jason.
All right.
So it takes a bit of time to configure those tasks. If you use the recorder, it can become easier. But again, they will be repeated many times by many users. So it takes time to create them, but then they will save a lot of time. So we're going to continue our live call with tech support.
All right.
And that workflow I showed you
is very simple.
Very simple. Now we're going to get the real workflow, which is way more complicated, Jason.
Always more.
Yes, it's everything here in yellow.
Yeah, it's always, but what about this? But what about this?
So it actually starts with getting a work order ID.
Okay.
Yeah, and you have to write down your time you start and the time you finish, because we get to bill the time the time it takes to other departments. So keep a good record. Then we don't just trust the way you create your building footprints, and we saw why. And you also need to validate you don't create overlaps or overlap the buildings with the parcel boundaries and so on. Make sure each one has an address. So we have to validate. And then if you have an error, you have to fix it. And unlike the previous steps, there's more than one way of fixing an error. Sometimes you might want to move, sometimes you might want to create. So it's getting complicated. There's not one tool in the right time. You need many tools. And only when you're done validating, then you can proceed to the next steps. And afterwards, we'll of course review that you didn't make mistakes. And that is because our users make a lot of errors. They forget to attribute some of the attributes. And even when they attribute it, they sometimes have spelling mistakes and they type the wrong things in the wrong place. They select the wrong features. They forget to write down the work order ID. They forget to write down the time or report the wrong time. They start working, they take a coffee break, they write that time as well. That's not fair to our customers. So that's a real challenge, which let's see if you can help me with that.
All right, so we're going to run through that same workflow, but we're going to enhance it to accommodate all those different scenarios that Amir pointed out. So we're going to run the Create Buildings Advanced workflow here. So the first step, I'm going to collapse this. The first step was to calculate a work order ID. So in the Actions tab, when you can set a command, you can also set a geoprocessing command, and you can also set a command called Get Attributes. What this does is it allows you to get an attribute from a user and store that at a later time. So this isn't copying an attribute from a feature. This is literally getting an attribute as input from the user. So in this case, I'm just going to type in a work order ID. That's the number that it's my ID, and I'm going to click next step. Locate's the same thing. I'm in my work order. I'm just going to click next step. Select subdivision. Let's say in this example I select 2 subdivisions by mistake. I'm going to click next step. Oh, an error pops up, and it explains to me what I'm doing wrong. It's saying, cannot retrieve attribute. You do not have one feature selected. Please only select one subdivision. So you can configure these errors. You can type in these errors and be very specific and inform the users when they're doing something wrong or when they're trying to proceed without doing something, what the issue is, so that they can fix it before going forward and having costly data QA, QC mistakes down the road. So I'm going to just select the one subdivision and click next step. Now we're going to create some building footprints. I'm still going to create my buildings in a very amazing pattern here of just squares.
You have a construction tool with orthogonality there.
Yeah, I've got a lot of tools at hand, but we only have like a couple minutes. All right, so once the buildings are done here, there we go. Created my buildings. I'm going to click next step. Now we have a topology in this map, and there's some errors. So in this example, as an author, I don't know the order in which my users are going to fix these errors. There's a lot of different tools that users can use to fix these errors. But I know during this workflow the types of errors that they might experience when creating building footprints. One of the errors would be buildings must contain an address point. Another error is address must be contained within a building. So I can kind of get an idea of what tools I need to provide my user in order to have him fix these errors that might arise. So we have what's called a palette. This is where you can run multiple tools in a non-sequential order and just go back and forth. So I've provided the fix error tool, I've provided the move tool, I provided the create feature. So if they're missing an address point, like for example down here, building must contain an address point. There's not even an address point nearby, so I can go ahead and click this and then drop it on the building there. If I go back to validate extent here, it's going to run validate again, and you'll see my error goes away there. These ones over here look like they do have the address points, they're just not on top of the building. So I can go ahead and click move, and then in the move tool, which is also embedded, I can select get my select tool, select my feature, and move it right on top of the address point. To think of each one of these tools here in the palette, think of them as an individual step. Each one of these palette tools has the ability to control the contents, control the selectability, control all that stuff. So you can, in the move tool, if you know it's just going to be address points that are going to be moving, you can make sure those are the only selectable layer when they click this move tool here. I can go back to create features, but I'm just going to go ahead and run revalidate. I won't worry about the other one right now. I've got that fixed, and I'm going to move on to the next step, which is attributing. So we're going to flip off the satellite imagery again, and it's going to take all those features I created, all those building footprints. In fact, it even took that address point that I created in the last step, selected them, provided it to me here in the attribute pane. If I scroll down, you'll see that work order ID that I entered back in step 1 has been calculated into the work order ID field on the address point. Additionally, it's been calculated onto the work order ID field of all the building footprints. My subdivision name has been calculated in the subdivision name, just like the step before. But looks like everything's good here, so I'm going to hit finish. Once again, we can catch other errors. I need to assign the number of stories. So as the author, I'm making sure that my users fill in the attributes properly after creating the building footprints. I need to make sure that once they're created, they need to input the number of stories for each one of the buildings. So I can go through, select all the buildings. I'm just going to give them all a number of stories as 2 stories, hit enter, and I'm going to hit finish. Now it allows me to proceed and moves on to the saving of the edits. I'm going to say no. Now,
pretty impressive, Jason, but you forgot to register to write down the time.
Yeah. So in terms of timekeeping management, I have gone through and enabled back in options under Tasks, Task History. To enable Task History, you simply check this box, point it to a geodatabase, File, Enterprise, whatever you want. In that geodatabase, you can create a history table or use a previously created history table on there to point to it. So I could have a project, you could have a project, completely different projects, pointing to the same history table on an enterprise geodatabase so that you can keep track of all the tasks that you do, all the tasks that I do, completely different task items. You can keep track of the time that are being run. So if I close out of this, back out, I actually added, if I go to View and Contents, I added the, God, docking things everywhere. Oh no, it's been scaled. I don't need this anymore. I've added the task history table to Pro, so I'm going to open it. And if you notice here, I've run this task 3 times during this demo. I've run in the project UC 2018 tasks demo. I've run the task item create buildings tasks. And then I've run the task create buildings. I ran the one that I created called UC demo create buildings. And then I ran the create buildings advanced one. Over here at the end, I can see the duration in seconds. This one was 131 seconds, this one was 17, and this one was 228.
But what happens if you get an email halfway through, you switch to your Outlook and...
If I get any type of email, or if I need to get up, go take a coffee break or whatever, if the mouse hasn't been moving for more than 5 seconds, it stops the timer. So you're not calculating this erroneous time of, oh, I'm going to go to lunch and, now that's an hour of time being spent on these tasks. Additionally, I can see when tasks were completed. When I double-clicked on that task that I created, I didn't complete it, I just backed out. So that's why it was only 17 seconds and it said I didn't complete it. Also, this is also a good metric so that if you are an author and you're creating a new task or you're updating an existing task, adding some more steps, and then all of a sudden you see a spike in your duration, like a huge spike, maybe you've done something that has made things less efficient, so you might need to go back and reconfigure the task to make it more efficient. So that is task history, 131 seconds. I think that is the exact same amount of seconds it took me like an hour ago to do this, man. I've got this down to a T.
The science of where? The science of what you've done.
Yes, exactly. Science of practice. All right. That's it for me. I'll head it back to you.
Thank you, Jason. So, once you created these wonderful tasks and you want to give it to others, let's say you're a consultancy firm or you're the administrator, the best way to share a task is within its project, as a project package. And the reason for that is that, as you saw, we control a lot of maps and layers, geoprocessing tools, maybe add-ins. They all need to be packaged together to work properly on the other side. So this is the best method. But if you wanted to share your best practice without sharing your data and your maps and layers, you can also do that. You can just share it on ArcGIS Online. The task name and the task description and the tags that you saw when you create a new task item will be the metadata for that item online. Other users can find it, the best way to digitize a building footprint. Download that and point it to their own maps and layers. So that's a way basically to share knowledge and best practices. And you can also share, you can right-click on a task item in Catalog and email it to someone else. You can also copy-paste them between projects, a specific task item or specific task, or within the project. You create a new task. You can even copy-paste steps, so if it makes sense. So that's useful. The metrics, they are by default, the task history is off. You have to set it up. And I don't know if you've seen charts in ArcGIS Pro. They're wonderful. You can even visualize after a while the different task durations as a chart. And we actually spy on our internal holistic testers in Esri using task. We know who's been running it and how much time it took them. So that's how we do that. So we also need to say when not to use tasks. So first thing is, if you have a workflow that takes a few days, I wouldn't use tasks. If Jason had to digitize 10,000 building footprints, That's probably not a good idea with his with the way he digitizes them, but that would take too long.
I'm fast.
Yes, too fast. So you wouldn't want to use that. If you're just starting with Pro, you're configuring your project, your maps are not final, you keep adding layers and removing layers, geoprocessing tools, wait till you stabilize, because if you use a task to turn on a layer, once you remove that layer, it will complain that it's trying to use a layer that doesn't exist, and you'll have to fix it. It's not a micromanagement tool. We don't constrain you to only use a task. While you're doing your task, you can still use other tools like the measure tool. So don't try to use it as a slacker, tracker, or micromanagement tool. And it doesn't replace geoprocessing models. A lot of the people in the GP community realize that they can combine commands with geoprocessing tools like a supermodel, which was very appealing. That is not the intent. The intent was to make things interactive. The best way is they complement each other really well. You can use selection and then use that selection to run a geoprocessing tool. So they work well together. The idea is to improve efficiency, but not to fully automate here. You can use tasks with one hand. Just use Alt-X to execute, to run, Alt-C to go continue to the next step, and Alt-S to skip a step, so all with the left hand. Sorry, all you left-handed people. But this works really well. Some tips and tricks. Sometimes we have people say the task failed. Well, it's the command in the task failed, and the reason it failed, for example, you call the snapping command, it's failing now because no map is open, right? It's out of context. So make sure the context is right. If you are calling a command that is disabled, like selection, first ask yourself why it's disabled. So you'll see on the ribbon that it is disabled, fix the context, and then try to run task again. And if it's failing because the map is closed, well, configure the task such that the map will be open in this step, and the right layers will be on. Other things, you don't need, like Jason did, you can minimize the ribbon, you can close all the panes. You don't want to buddy up the task pane with other panes together, because if they call the other pane, it might come in front and you kind of lose where you were in task. So tasks don't like to buddy up with other panes. Keep them separate. We also keep panes closed. So every pane we open, we also close for you. Leave nothing to chance. If you do selection stuff and it's really important, make sure you save that selection and call that selection later. Assume that the user will do everything they can to ruin your task. Close the maps, close the layers, change selection. So to some degree, right? So leave nothing to chance. When, like Jason did, he put the task designer next to the task pane, it makes it easier. By default, they are apart, and you might get might hurt your eyes. And you saw that recording is pretty easy, easier than looking for a command. If you look for the delete command or save command, you'll find 20 saves and 40 different deletes, and you wouldn't know which one is the right one. So if you know where it is on the ribbon, easier just to click it. Same goes for the GP tool, capture map view. Jason showed that, but if you have hundreds of layers, know that every time you say turn it on, it will make sure it's on, off, it will make sure it's off. So the best performance if you do nothing, of course, so just balance it. Don't do too much layer manipulation on every step, so it won't take too long unless you have just a few layers. During design, best to kind of check the optionals so you can skip through things as you go back and forth and iterate through it. Copy pasting task, we talked about it. We don't have if-then logic, okay? We don't plan to have that, to say if you get to step 3 and it meets this condition, jump to step 6. No. Programming, we call that Python. Use Python or other .NET to embed that logic. Many of things that were in the past only possible through customization, through coding, are now available through tasks, especially those wizard thing-like. So consider tasks before going into coding, which is way more expensive, or even just to prototype a workflow. Tasks can also call add-ins. So if you did have customization, you can have a step called an add-in. You can even use your add-in to call tasks. Okay, we have an SDK as well, so you can have a business system open a specific task, and you're going to be on the first step of that task and up and running. And remember, like the carrot, the motivation for users to use task is improved efficiency and better quality, right? This is the only way they're going to keep using it if you save time. And now the test. I saw some people escape fast before that. So, tasks are available in every license level. True or false? True. It's true. Every license level, you don't need to connect it, disconnected. It works in the field. Correct answer. Tasks replace geoprocessing models. False. Yeah. Good answer. Tasks can be shared between projects. True. You can share them, you can email them, you can put them online. The best way to share a task is in project package. Yes. You keep the resources, everything together. Manual behavior is the most efficient step behavior. False, right? It's a lot of manual labor. You don't want that 2 clicks for every step. And this is from Jason.
I usually hear an audible face palm during this one. It's just, you can just hear the...
Summary. So everybody can realize the task reduce the learning curve, but we didn't intend the use of them just for the new users, but that's a valid use case. You get the right tool in the right time. With a tool palette, you get the right tool set in the right time. We want to minimize all these contents clicking and selectability and visibility. Do it for the user when it makes sense. It saves a lot of setting the right environment is also important. Reduce mouse clicks is the goal. It also reduces the clutter with the panes because you get more real estate. You don't need to have 10 panes open at the same time. Selection management, efficiency improvement. The attribution tools, actions, again efficiency improvement. The verification action helps the quality of your product. It prevents you from doing mistakes. It prevents you from proceedings when you have the wrong type of inputs. So that's way better than catching it at a later time. And a tool set that's the tool palette. So tasks are all about sharing the best practice, sharing the knowledge. You can, if somebody is about to retire and only they know how to do something, you can capture it. If you do something once every year, I don't know, sharing, publishing, and you're not sure about how to do that, you can set a task for yourselves that you can easily remember how to do something yourself. Guide, share. You can also export it as a file and email it as a file to someone else. So that's about it. If you want to learn more, there's a lot of documentation as part of the ArcGIS Pro documentation. There's also training available for tasks, and there's also a few YouTube videos of this session of last year on the Esri YouTube channel. Join the task force. So if you have any ideas, things that we're missing, we got great feedback in the previous session about a checklist step. So
I think we need to get, you guys have all those pins on and stickers. I think we need to get a task force sticker that's a little star for next year. I'm going to suggest that. Okay,
that's a good idea. And if you want to ask more questions or more feedback, we have a small booth in the Geodatabase Management Island. That's
Spatial Data Management.
Spatial Data Management
Island. You'll find me down there, Christine.
Jason.
You'll definitely find us down there throughout the rest of the week. So come by if you want to see these demos again, or try to create tasks with your own data if you've got it. It's a great time to try it out.
We have to ask you, this is the last task session, so if you have any feedback, use the app. We also want to point out, if you want to look for references, that a lot of our solutions team are using tasks to deploy a solution, whether it's 3D analysis, creating building footprints from LiDAR, creating layouts. So completely different workflows, indoor navigation. So it's not all about editing. There's many different use cases. We even heard academic professors suggest that they're going to give an assignment to their students to create a task to solve a problem. And their homework will be to create the task. So interesting ideas from all over the place. So keep them coming. Thank you.
Thank you. And fill out the survey. We really like the feedback. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.